The Darden family mansion sat like a dying relic at the edge of the moors. Its walls were cracked, its windows clouded, and its gardens overgrown with weeds. Inside, candles burned low to hide the fading grandeur, the fraying curtains, the silver that had long since tarnished, and the echo of laughter that hadn't been heard in years. Serafina Darden sat quietly in the drawing room, pretending to sew. The needle trembled in her hand as her parents' voices drifted from the next room. "She's become impossible," hissed Lady Eugenia Darden, her mother. "No suitor wants a wife who talks back. Or one with such presence." Presence. Lord Alaric Darden gave a short, bitter laugh. "You mean size. Say it plain, Eugenia. The girl's too large for the fashion, and everyone knows it." Serafina's chest tightened. The words were familiar, yet they still hurt like fresh wounds. She looked down at her hands. Strong, capable hands, not the delicate kind poets wrote about. Her reflection in the window showed a woman with full curves, deep auburn hair, and eyes that always looked a little too knowing for her own good. She had stopped trying to fit into society's mold long ago, but that didn't mean she didn't feel the sting of rejection. Her younger sister, Celeste, had been everything their mother adored. Small, fair, and obedient. Celeste had married at 19. Her wedding gown sewn from silk bought with money Serafina's dowry should have covered. That had been 3 years ago. Since then, the Dardens' debts had grown heavier than the velvet curtains hanging in their hall. Serafina set down her embroidery and listened closer. She shouldn't eavesdrop, but when had her future ever been discussed with her instead of about her? "What do you propose we do?" Lady Eugenia demanded. "We've no dowry left for her, and the creditors grow impatient." Lord Alaric sighed. "There may be one last chance. I've been contacted by someone, a man of immense wealth. A duke, I believe. Dorian Thorne." There was a pause. Then her mother's voice softened with intrigue. "The Duke of Thornvale. I thought him a recluse." "He is," her father admitted. "Rarely seen at social gatherings. Lives far out on the cliffs beyond Hollowmere. But he has made an offer." Serafina frowned. An offer? What kind of offer involved her? Her mother's voice turned sharp. "An offer for what, Alaric?" Lord Alaric hesitated, his words heavy. "For Serafina." The world tilted for a moment. The sound of the fire crackling faded beneath the pounding of her heart. She rose quietly, crossing the floor until she could see through the half-open door. Her father sat with his head in his hands, while her mother's expression shifted between shock and calculation. "He wishes to marry her?" Lady Eugenia asked, incredulous. "In a sense," Lord Alaric said slowly. "He is willing to pay handsomely, clear all our debts. But his letter was unusual. He said he values women of depth and substance." Lady Eugenia let out a brittle laugh. "Substance indeed. That's one way to put it. But what could a man like that possibly want with her?" Serafina's hands curled into fists. She turned away before they could see her tears. For 22 years she had been the disappointment, the daughter too bold, too outspoken, too unlike the delicate ladies who giggled behind fans. But this, to be sold like a problem to be solved, was worse than anything. That night, as rain battered the windows, Serafina sat alone in her room. She looked out at the moors, wild, dark, endless, and whispered, "Maybe the wind would treat me more kindly than my own family." When morning came, a letter arrived sealed in black wax bearing the mark of a raven. Lord Alaric's hands trembled as he read it aloud at breakfast. "The Duke will arrive this evening," he said. "He wishes to meet her in person before any arrangement is made." Lady Eugenia clapped her hands. "This could save us, Alaric. You must make sure she behaves." Serafina lifted her chin. "Perhaps the Duke should see me as I am, not as something polished to please him." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "Serafina, do not test my patience. You will wear your blue gown. The one that hides your flaws." "My flaws," Serafina repeated softly, a bitter smile touching her lips. You mean the parts of me that take up space. She left the table before her mother could reply, but she heard her father murmur, "Let her be, Eugenia. By tonight, she'll be someone else's concern." By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed and silent. Candles glowed in the windows of Darden Manor as servants rushed to prepare for the mysterious guest. Silver polished, wine poured, nervous glances exchanged. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Serafina stood by the drawing-room fireplace, wearing the blue gown her mother had chosen. It fit snugly around her curves, the fabric rich but slightly outdated. She had braided her hair herself, not caring for elaborate curls or powder. Her heart beat fast, not from excitement but dread. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel echoed through the quiet. Her father straightened his coat, her mother forced a smile, and the butler hurried to open the door. When the Duke of Thornvale entered, it felt as though the air itself shifted. He was tall, impossibly tall, with dark hair that gleamed like wet ink and eyes the color of silver coins caught in moonlight. His presence filled the room before he spoke a word. He wore a long velvet coat, black as midnight, and carried a cane tipped with onyx. Every movement was precise, deliberate, yet there was something not entirely human about the stillness that clung to him. "Lord and Lady Darden," he said smoothly, bowing. His voice was deep and calm, the kind that made people listen. "I thank you for receiving me." "The honor is ours, Your Grace," said Lord Alaric quickly. "Please come in. The weather has been dreadful." The Duke's gaze drifted around the room, past the portraits, the flickering candles, the nervous smiles, until it settled on Serafina. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Not with mockery, not even with surprise. Just looked, as if she were something fascinating, something rare. Serafina felt heat rise to her cheeks. No one had ever stared at her like that. Not even Celeste's husband had looked at her sister that way. "This must be Miss Serafina," he said, his lips curving into the faintest smile. "Your letters did not do her justice." Lady Eugenia tittered nervously. "Ah, well, Serafina has a strong spirit. And a generous figure." "She is." "Perfect," Dorian interrupted softly. The room fell silent. Even the fire seemed to dim. Serafina blinked. "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I see more in a single moment than most people do in a lifetime." Her father cleared his throat. "Your Grace, you mentioned an arrangement." "Yes," Dorian said, turning his gaze back to him. "I understand your estate is strained. I am prepared to clear your debts in full. In return, I ask for your daughter's hand in marriage." Lady Eugenia gasped, then quickly tried to hide her delight behind her handkerchief. "Marriage? You are serious." "I am never otherwise," Dorian said simply. Serafina felt her pulse quicken. "You would marry me, without knowing who I am, what I want." Dorian turned to her again, eyes softening. "Then tell me, what do you want, Miss Darden?" Her parents exchanged horrified looks. A young woman speaking directly to a duke was scandalous enough, but to be asked for her opinion was unheard of. Serafina lifted her chin. "I want honesty. I want to know if you're offering marriage or purchase, Your Grace." "There's a difference." Dorian's lips twitched in amusement. "Indeed there is. And I assure you, I have no desire to buy anyone. I wish to marry a woman who sees the world beyond her mirror." Her father stammered. "But surely—" Dorian raised a hand. "Please, Lord Darden. I prefer to hear her speak." That small gesture, so simple yet so powerful, silenced the room. Serafina took a breath. "You would forgive my boldness, but why me? You could have any woman you wished." Dorian studied her carefully, as though her question mattered deeply. "Because I do not wish for any woman. I wish for one who thinks, one who feels, one who has endured cruelty and still stands with her head high. I see that in you." She stared at him, words caught in her throat. The sound of his voice was steady and sincere, not a practiced compliment, not empty flattery. He spoke as if he saw through the layers of hurt she had carried all her life. Lady Eugenia broke the silence. Your Grace, Seraphina is not accustomed to such attention. She is accustomed to being underestimated, Dorian said sharply, his tone cool now. But not by me. Her mother blanched. Her father looked from one to the other, confused and wary, torn between greed and fear of offending the Duke. Your Grace, he said carefully, you would be taking on a woman with opinions, and a body not suited to fashion. Dorian smiled faintly. Fashion dies every decade. A mind like hers could outlast centuries. Seraphina blinked at the strange phrasing. Centuries. Before she could ask, he stepped closer, not enough to frighten her, but enough that she could feel the coldness that seemed to radiate from him. Miss Darden, I do not ask for your obedience. Only your consent. She looked at him, this stranger whose presence filled the room like nightfall, and then at her parents, who saw her only as a solution to their debts. For the first time in her life, the choice felt like hers. If I refuse, she asked quietly. Dorian inclined his head. Then I will leave. And your life will continue as it is now. Her gaze moved to her mother, who avoided her eyes, and her father, already calculating the profit of her acceptance. Then back to Dorian, who watched her not like a possession, but like someone waiting for an equal answer. Seraphina straightened her shoulders. Then I accept. I will marry you, Duke Thorn. A flicker of something, relief perhaps or victory, passed through his eyes. Then it is settled. He reached for her hand, his touch cool but gentle. You will not regret your choice, Seraphina. She searched his face. You speak as though you already know what my regrets might be. I have lived long enough to recognize them, he said quietly. And I intend to spare you the worst of them. His words unsettled her, but not in a way that made her draw back. Instead, something inside her, something buried deep, stirred. When he left later that night, promising to return within the week, the house felt emptier than before. Lady Eugenia fluttered about, making plans for gowns and invitations, while Lord Alaric counted imaginary riches. Seraphina retreated to her room, staring out at the storm clouds gathering again over the moors. He says he'll spare me regret, she whispered to the night. But what if regret is the only thing I understand? Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, echoing her uncertainty. Yet beneath the unease, something else lingered, a quiet spark of hope. The kind that flickers just before a story changes forever. 3 days passed before the Duke of Thornvale returned. Those 3 days felt like an eternity to Seraphina. Her mother fluttered around her like a nervous bird, fussing about gowns, jewelry, and posture. Her father spent hours pacing, muttering about debts and salvation. The entire household seemed to hold its breath for the arrival of one man. By the time Dorian Thorne's carriage rolled up the long drive again, twilight had fallen. The setting sun cast the sky in shades of crimson and violet, and the sound of hooves on wet stone echoed through the courtyard like a drumbeat of fate. Seraphina stood waiting in the grand hall, wearing a gown of deep green velvet. It was not her mother's choice. She had picked it herself, bold, rich, and unapologetically suited to her curves. Her hair was loose tonight, falling in waves over her shoulders. She refused to look like a painted doll for anyone, even a duke. The heavy doors opened, and there he was again, tall, immaculate, and as unshakably calm as ever. His coat glimmered faintly under the chandeliers, and the cold air seemed to follow him inside. Miss Darden, he said, inclining his head. You are radiant this evening. She gave a polite smile. Radiant or not, Your Grace, I believe we have unfinished business. Her mother gasped softly. Seraphina. But Dorian only smiled, that slow, deliberate smile that seemed to see straight through a person. Indeed we do. Shall we speak privately? The request was bold, but Lord Alaric was too nervous to refuse. Of course, Your Grace. The library will serve. They entered the candlelit library, the scent of old books and rain-soaked earth drifting through the open window. Dorian closed the door behind them with a soft click. For a moment neither spoke. Serafina stood near the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Dorian watched her with quiet intensity, his eyes gleaming faintly even in the dim light. "You seem unafraid," he said at last. She turned to him. "Should I be afraid of a man offering marriage to a woman he's known less than a week?" "Perhaps," he said softly. "Most women are." "Then perhaps most women are wiser than me," she replied. A low chuckle escaped him. "Or braver." She folded her hands in front of her. "You said before that you wished to marry a woman who sees the world beyond her mirror. That's a poetic answer, but not a practical one." "Why me? Truly?" Dorian studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because I've spent centuries surrounded by masks. You are the first person I've met in many years who does not wear one." "Centuries," she repeated, arching a brow. "A manner of speaking," he said smoothly, though the faint curve of his lips suggested otherwise. "Your presence commands attention, Miss Darden. And not because of how others see you, but because of how you carry yourself despite it." Her heart fluttered despite herself. No man had ever said anything like that to her, not with such calm certainty. "And what do you offer in return, Your Grace?" she asked carefully. "Security. Freedom from the burden your family has placed upon you," he said. "And respect. Always respect." Serafina hesitated, torn between disbelief and longing. "You speak as though you know what it means to be trapped." "I do," he said quietly. "Far better than you can imagine." She felt a chill at the way his gaze darkened for an instant. Then his expression softened again. "I would never demand your affection," he continued. "Only your trust, and your consent to begin anew." Her pulse quickened. "And if I say yes, what becomes of my family?" "Their debts will vanish," he said simply. "The Darden name will be restored. And you, Serafina, will be free from their expectations forever." Her throat tightened. Freedom. It was a word she'd never dared to dream of. Yet now it stood before her, wrapped in velvet and danger. "Your Grace," she said softly, "if I agree to this, I want honesty from you. I don't want to discover that I've traded one kind of prison for another." Dorian inclined his head solemnly. "Then I will give you honesty, though it may not always be what you wish to hear. Do you accept that?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." "Then so be it." He stepped closer, his voice a low murmur. "Our union will be swift. I do not care for long engagements or public spectacle. A small ceremony will suffice." "So soon?" she asked, startled. "I am a man accustomed to action, not delay," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "The world hesitates too often over what it truly wants." Her heart pounded as she met his gaze. "And what is it that you truly want?" "You," he said simply. The word hung in the air like a spark. No flourish, no poetry, just a truth that made her breath catch. She turned toward the window, her pulse wild. "You hardly know me, Your Grace." "Perhaps not," he said softly behind her, "but I have known loneliness long enough to recognize its opposite when I see it." When she looked back, he was closer, too close. His eyes gleamed like mercury, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "You deserve a life where you are not treated as less. Let me give you that." Her mind screamed caution, but her heart, long starved of kindness, whispered something else. "Oh, dangerous, foolish hope." "All right," she said finally, barely above a whisper. "I will marry you." He smiled then, a slow, satisfied curve of lips that seemed almost sorrowful. "You will not regret this, Serafina Darden." She tried to smile in return. "You speak as though you already know my future." "Perhaps," he murmured, brushing her knuckles lightly with his gloved hand. "Or perhaps I simply intend to protect it." When he left the library, Serafina stood for a long while, staring into the storm-dark window. The reflection staring back was no longer the quiet daughter her family had dismissed. She wasn't sure what she was becoming, but she knew the change had begun. The next morning brought chaos to Darden Manor. Servants scurried through halls, carrying linens and boxes, while Lady Eugenia gave shrill orders. Lord Alaric beamed with relief. The Duke's offer had saved them, and sold their daughter in the same breath. The ceremony was set for the following evening. No grand church or gathering, just a legal exchange, witnessed by the local priest and 2 servants. Lady Eugenia wept over the simplicity, but Serafina felt strangely calm. She spent most of the day alone, sitting in the empty conservatory as rain tapped against the glass. The world beyond the window was soft and grey, the air thick with mist. Somewhere deep down, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. Dorian stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room as always. His dark coat gleamed faintly, droplets of rain clinging to the fabric. "You should not be alone on the eve of your wedding," he said gently. Serafina looked up. "I've been alone most of my life, Your Grace. A few more hours won't harm me." He moved closer. "Do you regret your decision?" "I don't know yet," she admitted honestly. "It feels like stepping off a cliff, hoping the wind will catch me. Then I will make sure it does," he said quietly. She gave a small laugh. "Do you always speak like a poet, or is that a habit born of wealth?" "Neither," he replied with a faint smile. "It's the language of those who have lived too long." "Too long," she echoed. He did not answer, only studied her face with that same unreadable expression. "Do you trust me, Serafina?" "I want to," she said softly. "That's something, isn't it?" "It is," he said, bowing his head slightly. "Then trust that tomorrow marks not the end of your freedom, but its beginning." That night she barely slept. When dawn came, the sky was pale and cloudless for the first time in days. The ceremony was held at sunset, just as Dorian had wished. Serafina wore a gown of ivory silk, simple, elegant, unadorned. Her mother fretted over the lack of lace. Her father checked the documents thrice. Dorian stood calm and composed at the front of the hall, his silver eyes never leaving her as she walked toward him. The priest's voice droned softly over the ceremony, words about duty and devotion. Serafina's hands trembled as Dorian took them in his. His skin was cool against hers, but his grip was steady, reassuring. When the vows came, Dorian's voice was low and certain. "I take you, Serafina Darden, not as possession but as partner, to honor, protect and cherish, as long as this world shall allow." Her throat tightened as she echoed him. The words felt foreign on her tongue. Honor, cherish, partner. No one had ever used them when speaking of her. When the ceremony ended, the priest pronounced them husband and wife. The air in the room seemed to hum faintly, or perhaps that was her imagination. Dorian lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, lingering there just a moment longer than custom required. "Welcome to your new life, my lady," he murmured. Later that evening, after farewells and false tears, Serafina stood beside Dorian's carriage as he helped her in. Her parents waved from the steps, their smiles brittle and relieved. She looked at them one last time, wondering if they even realized they'd lost her long before tonight. As the carriage rolled away, the familiar world faded behind them, replaced by open road, fog, and the faint cry of night birds. Dorian sat across from her, watching her quietly. "Are you frightened?" he asked after a while. "I don't know what I am," she admitted. "It feels like everything I've ever known is dissolving behind me." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes we must let the old world die to be reborn in another." His words sent a shiver down her spine. "And what kind of world are you taking me to?" "One where you will never be small again," he said softly. They rode in silence after that. Hours passed, the moon climbing high. When the carriage finally stopped, Serafina looked out the window and caught her breath. Before her rose Ravenhurst Hall, vast, shadowed, and beautiful in a haunting way. Towers reached toward the sky like stone fingers, and lights glowed faintly in the high windows. The surrounding woods whispered in the night breeze. Dorian stepped down first and extended his hand. "Welcome home, Lady Thorne." She hesitated before taking it. His touch was still cool but somehow comforting. The manor loomed behind him, ancient and alive, as if it were watching her. "Home," she repeated softly, stepping down onto the gravel. The word tasted strange, heavy with promise and danger. Dorian's expression softened. "You'll grow accustomed to it. Ravenhurst has a way of revealing its heart only to those who belong." "And do I belong here?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "More than you realize." As they walked toward the great doors, Serafina glanced back once. The carriage driver was already turning away, disappearing into the mist. The world she'd known was gone, swallowed by the night. Ahead of her, the doors opened soundlessly, revealing a grand hall lined with flickering candles and portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every step. Somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock struck midnight. Her new husband turned to her with a faint, enigmatic smile. "Welcome to Ravenhurst, Serafina. From this night forward, your life begins again." And as the doors closed behind them with a deep, echoing thud, Serafina felt the truth of it in her bones. Whatever she had been before, daughter, burden, disappointment, was gone. What waited ahead she could not yet name. But it was vast and dark and hers. The following day dawned in a pale gold light that quickly faded beneath heavy clouds. By late afternoon, the sky was the color of pewter, and the air held that quiet tension that comes before rain. Ravenhurst Hall glimmered faintly in the distance, its tall windows flickering with hundreds of candles, each flame reflected like watchful eyes. Serafina stood before the great mirror in her chamber, her reflection caught in the soft glow. The gown she wore was unlike anything she had ever owned, silver-gray silk that clung gently to her form, the neckline traced with delicate black lace. The color was neither bridal white nor mourning black, something in between, something that felt right. She turned as a knock came at the door. It was Martha, an older maid with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "The carriage is ready, milady," she said, smoothing her apron. "The Duke waits for you in the chapel." Serafina took a steadying breath. "Tell me the truth, Martha. Do I look ridiculous?" The maid smiled faintly. "No, my lady. You look like someone who's finally been seen for who she is." That small kindness steadied her more than any sermon could. The chapel stood at the far end of the manor grounds, small, ancient, with ivy curling around its stones like veins. Inside, it smelled faintly of rain and candle wax. There were no guests, no music, only Dorian Thorne standing at the altar, dressed in dark attire that made his pale skin seem even more luminous. When she entered, he turned to her, and for a moment she could swear the entire room brightened. "You came," he said softly. "Would you have doubted it?" "I doubt everything," he murmured. "Except you." Her heart gave a strange little tremor at that. The ceremony was brief. The priest's voice echoed faintly off the stone walls, his words lost beneath the rhythmic patter of rain beginning outside. When Dorian took Serafina's hand, his touch was cool, but his eyes burned with a warmth she didn't expect. "Do you, Serafina Darden, take Dorian Thorne as your husband?" She met his gaze. "I do." "And do you, Dorian Thorne, take Serafina Darden as your wife?" "I do," he said quietly, his voice rougher than before. The priest smiled, thin and weary. "Then by the laws of God and man, I declare you." But the words were drowned by a low roll of thunder that shook the chapel windows. For an instant, the candles flickered out, leaving them in sudden darkness. Serafina gasped softly, reaching out instinctively. Dorian caught her hand at once. "Do not fear," he said. His voice seemed to echo strangely in the dark. "The storm always answers when vows are true." When the light returned, the air smelled faintly of ozone. The priest looked uneasy but completed the blessing. "You may kiss your bride," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Dorian's gaze held hers. "May I?" Serafina nodded, unable to find words. He leaned in slowly, his lips brushing hers just once, light, reverent, as though afraid to break something sacred. Yet that single touch sent a warmth spiraling through her chest, and when he drew back, she saw something flicker in his eyes, a depth that frightened her almost as much as it fascinated her. "From this night onward," he whispered, "you are not bound by anyone's judgment but your own." She didn't understand the weight behind those words then, but she would. Afterward, they returned to the carriage waiting outside. As they drove away from the chapel, the rain came harder, beating against the roof like 1,000 whispering hands. Dorian sat beside her, silent, thoughtful. "Are you always this quiet after weddings?" she asked finally. He turned to her, and his faint smile returned. "Only after the ones that matter." The manor loomed ahead, its windows glowing with welcome light. The moment the carriage stopped, servants hurried forward with umbrellas. Martha guided Serafina inside while Dorian lingered a moment at the door, his face tilted toward the rain as if listening to something distant. When he joined her in the grand hall, he said softly, "You are now Lady Thorne. Ravenhurst is yours as much as mine." She gave a small, uncertain laugh. "That may take some getting used to." He studied her a moment longer, then said quietly, "There is much about this life that takes getting used to. But I promise, you will never face it alone." That night, she dreamed of strange things. Moonlight spilling across marble floors, a mirror that reflected no one, and eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Serafina woke to pale morning light slipping between heavy drapes. For a moment she forgot where she was. The bed beneath her was vast and soft, the sheets cool and scented faintly of lavender. When she sat up, she realized she was alone. A small note rested on the bedside table, written in an elegant hand. "Dearest Serafina, forgive my early departure. There are matters that require my attention before sunset. Martha will see that you are made comfortable. I look forward to dining with you this evening. Diti." She ran her fingers over the letters, noticing how steady and careful they were, yet the pressure of the pen was deep, as though written by someone who didn't often commit words to paper. By late morning, she ventured out of her chamber, guided by Martha. The manor seemed endless. Long corridors lined with portraits, grand staircases curling like ribbons, windows that looked out on endless mist. "Does he live here alone?" Serafina asked. Martha hesitated. "Mostly yes. There's the staff of course, but his grace keeps to himself. Prefers quiet. Prefers the night." "The night. Work, milady," the maid said quickly, as though realizing she'd said too much. "He's fond of reading after dark. Always has been." They paused in a vast gallery where portraits stared down at them. One near the end caught Serafina's attention, a woman in a crimson gown, her features hauntingly familiar. "She looks like me," Serafina murmured. Martha paled slightly. "That's Lady Amara, one of the Duke's ancestors. A tragic story, they say. What happened to her?" The maid lowered her gaze. "It isn't my place to tell, milady. But the Duke keeps her memory close." Serafina studied the painting. The woman's eyes were green like her own, her expression serene, but there was a sadness in it, the kind that lingers through time. By afternoon, the fog had lifted enough to reveal the manor gardens. Martha led her outside, where black roses grew in symmetrical lines along the paths. Their petals glistened like wet velvet. "They bloom all year," Martha explained, her tone hushed. "No one knows how." Serafina bent to touch one. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Careful, milady," the maid said quickly. "They bite." Serafina laughed, thinking it a jest, until she noticed a thin thorn had drawn a bead of blood from her fingertip. That evening Dorian returned. The sun had set completely by the time he appeared at the dining hall doors. He looked unchanged, composed, but there was something restless in his movements, as though he'd walked through a storm no one else could see. "You look well," he said, taking the seat opposite hers. "Ravenhurst suits you." "It's more than I imagined," she admitted. though I'm certain I've lost my way twice already." His faint smile returned. "That's part of the charm. The house changes with its mistress." She tilted her head. "That sounds like superstition." "Everything true sounds like superstition to those who have forgotten wonder," he replied. The meal was simple: roasted duck, fresh bread, wine dark as ink. She noticed he never touched his plate, though he lifted his glass once or twice without drinking. "Are you not hungry?" she asked finally. He looked at her over the rim of the glass. "Not for the same things you are." Her cheeks warmed at the way he said it, though his tone was gentle, not teasing. "You do love to speak in riddles, don't you?" "Only when truth would frighten." "Then perhaps I prefer the riddle," she said quietly. He smiled again, faint, approving. "You are braver than most. The world has tried to make you small, yet here you sit, unbent. Do you know how rare that is?" She met his gaze, finding it difficult to look away. "And yet you speak as if you've seen centuries of the world's cruelty." He didn't answer at first. Then softly, "Perhaps I have." The candles flickered, throwing strange shadows across his face. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of silver that wasn't quite human. She blinked and it was gone. "Tell me," he said after a pause, his voice gentler now. "When they spoke of you, your parents, the world, what did they say that you believed?" She hesitated, taken aback. "They said I was too much. Too opinionated. Too large for anyone to want me." "And did you believe them?" She swallowed hard. "For a long time, yes." He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Then let me be the first to undo that lie. You're not too much. The world has simply been too little." She stared at him, words caught in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that, not even in her wildest dreams. "You don't know me," she whispered. "Not yet," he said. "But I intend to." After dinner, he led her through the moonlit hallways to a glass corridor overlooking the gardens. The black roses shimmered faintly in the dark, their petals reflecting the moonlight like mirrors. "They only open after sunset," he said. "They thrive in shadow." "Like you?" she asked before she could stop herself. He turned to her, amusement flickering across his face. "Perhaps." They stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with something unspoken. Then he said quietly, "You should rest. Tomorrow I'll show you the rest of the estate, if you dare." She smiled faintly. "Is that a challenge?" "It's a promise," he murmured, and the way he said it made her heart stumble. When he left her at her door, Serafina leaned against the frame for a moment, her pulse still unsteady. The hall was silent except for the soft hiss of wine through the windows. She turned back toward her room and froze. In the large mirror across from her bed, her reflection stared back, but for a split second she thought she saw two figures, herself and a shadow behind her that vanished when she blinked. She shivered, glancing toward the door Dorian had just closed. Ravenhurst was beautiful, yes, but it was also alive. And as the wind rose outside, carrying the faint scent of roses and rain, Serafina realized that whatever she had married into was not merely mystery or fortune. It was something far older, something waiting. The days that followed settled into an odd rhythm. Mornings belonged to silence. Serafina would wake to find her husband gone, his side of the bed perfectly smooth, as though he had never slept there at all. The servants moved quietly, always respectful but slightly distant, as if bound by unspoken rules. Afternoons were filled with long walks through echoing corridors, or hours in the vast library that smelled of dust, parchment, and something faintly metallic, like old coins or blood. By evening, Dorian would appear, perfectly composed, as though he had stepped out of a portrait. They would dine together, talk, and then he would vanish again before dawn. That first week, Serafina convinced herself it was just his nature, eccentric, private, perhaps even lonely. But by the 10th night, curiosity gnawed at her. That evening, as they sat before the fire, she decided to ask. "You keep strange hours, husband," she said lightly. I wake and you're gone. I sleep and you return from wherever you go. Do you never tire? He turned from the fire, his face painted with its orange glow. Not in the same way you do. She raised a brow. And what way is that? The kind that rests the body, he said. My kind of weariness is different. It sits in the soul. Serafina studied him. His words sounded rehearsed, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a shadow she couldn't read. Then perhaps you should let me ease that weariness, she said softly. That is what a wife is meant to do, isn't it? For the first time since she had known him, Dorian looked truly startled. Then a smile curved his lips, not cold or calculated this time, but almost tender. You are not what I expected, Serafina Thorne. I take that as a compliment, she said. It should be. His voice dropped velvet smooth. Most people are content with illusion. You reach for truth, even when it might wound you. Perhaps I've been wounded enough to know the difference. Perhaps, he murmured, gaze flicking to the fire again. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The flames danced, the rain whispered outside, and for a fleeting moment, she felt they might have been ordinary people in an ordinary marriage, before his next words unsettled her completely. Tell me, Serafina, he said, turning his gaze back to her. Do you believe that some souls are bound before they ever meet? That when they do, they simply recognize each other? She blinked. I believe most people call that fate. Fate, he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. Yes, or perhaps memory. His tone was strange, distant and almost mournful. I think, she said carefully, that sometimes we meet people who make us feel less alone in the world. Whether that's fate or just longing, I can't say. Dorian smiled faintly. Then let us call it both. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression warned her not to press. Instead she asked, would you tell me about this house? Martha says Ravenhurst has been in your family for centuries. He chuckled quietly, the sound low and smooth. She tells you only what she dares. This house has outlived every one of my ancestors. It was old before they gave it a name. That sounds like superstition, she said, echoing his earlier words. He gave her a look she couldn't decipher. Sometimes superstition is just history too heavy to be spoken aloud. Before she could reply, the grandfather clock struck midnight. Dorian stood. It's late. You should rest. And you? She asked. He paused at the door. I'll keep watch. From what? A flicker of a smile crossed his face. From everything that doesn't belong in your dreams. Then he was gone. Serafina sat by the fire long after he'd left, listening to the echo of his words. The flames cast shifting patterns along the walls, making the carved figures in the mantel seem to move. She rubbed her arms, feeling a sudden chill. When she finally climbed into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was awake even after the candles had burned out. The next morning brought a brittle, cold sunlight that felt wrong in the corridors of Ravenhurst. Serafina decided to explore while the staff were busy with chores. Curiosity, after all, was her oldest habit, and this house seemed built to provoke it. She wandered through galleries where portraits watched her with eyes too lifelike, through rooms filled with antique instruments that no longer played, and past tall windows that framed only fog. Every door opened easily except one, the west wing. Its handle refused to turn, though she could have sworn she heard a faint sound beyond it. A whisper. Zai. Martha found her there and startled. You shouldn't be in this hall, milady. Why not? Serafina asked. It's part of my home now. Some doors here stay closed for good reason, the maid said quickly, glancing toward the locked door. Old things don't always stay quiet. Serafina smiled, though unease pricked her. Old things don't frighten me. Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. They should. Later that day, while trying to find her way back to the library, Serafina entered a small sitting room lined with mirrors. Most were covered with silk cloths, but one stood uncovered, a tall, ornate piece framed in silver. She stopped before it, drawn to her own reflection. For a moment she only saw herself. Then, as she leaned closer, the image flickered. Her reflection remained still while she moved. She froze. Her heart thudded once, hard. Then the image caught up again, perfectly normal. She laughed nervously to herself. Just nerves, she muttered. Or too little breakfast. But when she turned to leave, the reflection did not turn with her. Serafina spun back. Her mirror self faced her directly, lips curved into the faintest knowing smile. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The mirror showed only her own pale face, wide-eyed and trembling. She stumbled back, knocking into a chair. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I imagined it." But deep down she knew she hadn't. That evening, when Dorian joined her for dinner, she tried to appear calm. He noticed immediately. "You're pale," he said. "Did something trouble you today?" She hesitated. "It's silly. I doubt that. There's a mirror upstairs," she began, trying to sound casual. It behaved oddly. My reflection didn't move. And for a moment I thought." She stopped, feeling foolish. "You thought it smiled at you," he finished quietly. Her blood ran cold. "How did you?" "There are many mirrors in Ravenhurst," he said softly. "Some of them remember more than they reflect." "That's not possible," she said, half laughing, half afraid. "Not in the world you came from," he said. "But this place sits on older ground. Things here. Listen." His tone was too calm, too certain. "Are you trying to frighten me?" she asked. "No," he said, meeting her gaze. "Only to prepare you. There are truths about this house, and about me, that I've not yet told." "Then tell me now." "I will," he said, though his expression was unreadable. "But not tonight. You've had enough of shadows for one day. You think I can't handle them. I think you underestimate how deep they go." Frustration sparked in her chest. "You speak as though I'm fragile. I'm not." "I know," he said. "That's precisely why I brought you here." She stared at him. "Brought me? You make it sound as though you chose me for something other than marriage." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps I did." Before she could demand an explanation, he stood and extended a hand. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her through a side door, down a narrow stairway that spiraled into the earth. The air grew cooler, damp and still. At the bottom was an underground gallery lined with glass cases and faded tapestries. In the center stood a single pedestal bearing an old mirror, the twin of the one upstairs, but covered by a black cloth. "This is where it began," he said softly. "What is it?" "A relic. A warning. It once belonged to a woman named Amara." Serafina froze. "The woman from the portrait?" "Yes. She was dear to me." His voice trembled almost imperceptibly. "She looked very much like you." "And what happened to her?" "She died," he said simply. "And some part of her never left. The mirrors were hers. They remember her face." The room felt suddenly smaller. "You said she was dear to you," Serafina whispered. "Was she your wife?" "She was my heart," he said quietly. "And my curse." Before she could ask what that meant, a noise echoed faintly from above. Footsteps or maybe wind. Dorian glanced upward, tense, then turned back to her. "It's time we returned," he said. She followed, though her thoughts were a tangle of questions. When they reached her chambers, he stopped at the door. "Stay inside tonight," he said softly. "Promise me." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because the house wakes on certain nights. And it listens for new voices." "And if I disobey?" she asked, half smiling. "Then it might answer," he said, his tone grave. Her smile faltered. "You truly believe that?" "I know it," he said simply. When he left, she locked the door, though she wasn't sure why. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows across the floor. She sat at her dressing table, staring at her reflection in the smaller mirror there. Her pulse was unsteady. Only superstition, she whispered to herself. The reflection's lips moved too, but a fraction too late. Then the candles guttered, one by one, and went out. In the sudden darkness, Serafina thought she heard a woman's voice, faint and distant, whispering through the silence. "You're not the first to wear his ring." She turned sharply toward the sound, but there was nothing there, only the quiet hum of the house, alive and listening. When dawn finally came, she had not slept at all. The night after the whisper from the mirror, Serafina did not dare sleep. She kept a candle burning until its wick drowned in its own wax. When dawn came, she felt hollow, as though part of her had stayed awake even while her body sat motionless in the chair. By the time the sun sank again, her nerves were raw. Martha appeared at her door before sunset. "His Grace requests that you join him in the garden, milady. He says the moon will favor you tonight." "The moon?" Serafina echoed, bewildered. The maid only smiled a thin, uncertain smile. "It's best not to question his words, milady. Just enjoy the view while you can." Outside, Ravenhurst shimmered beneath a heavy sky. The garden stretched behind the manor like a world of its own, vast and overgrown but somehow immaculate. Stone paths coiled through walls of roses, black and deep crimson, their scent heavy and intoxicating. In the center stood a small marble fountain. The water within glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight like silver fire. Dorian waited beside it. His dark coat blended with the shadows, but his face caught the pale gleam of the moon, making him look carved from starlight. "You came," he said softly. "I feared you might hide in your room again." "You told me not to stay inside forever," she said. "Besides, if this house wants to listen to me, let it." A low laugh escaped him. "You're fearless, Serafina. The walls will soon learn to whisper more gently around you." She looked around at the strange glowing flowers. "How do they bloom like this? Even the moonlight feels different here." "Because it is," he said. "These gardens were sown long before Ravenhurst was built. The soil remembers the blood that fed it." "The blood?" He looked at her carefully. "Every legend has its price. Once, long ago, the thorn line sealed a vow here. The earth accepted it. That is why nothing dies in this place. Not completely." Serafina shivered. "You speak of death as if it's a neighbor you've known for years." "In a way," he said quietly. "I have." They began walking the narrow paths. Everywhere, moonlight poured down like liquid silver, washing over the roses until they seemed to breathe. Their petals opened wider as she passed, as though turning toward her. "They move," she whispered. "They recognize life," he murmured. "And perhaps something else." They reached the fountain. The surface of the water rippled with no wind to disturb it. Dorian stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the chill of his presence. "I wanted to bring you here because this is the heart of Ravenhurst," he said. "It shows what is true, not what people wish to see." "And what do you see, Dorian?" He looked down into the silver water. "You," she frowned. "You say that as if it means more than it should." "It does," he said simply. "I see you as you are meant to be. Unafraid, magnificent, unbroken by the world that tried to make you small." "You keep calling me brave, but you don't know the half of me," she said. "I've been afraid my whole life. I just got good at hiding it." "That is still bravery." His gaze caught hers. "Fear is only weakness when it wins." For a long time they stood in silence, the air between them charged with something neither wanted to name. Then Dorian lifted his hand and touched her cheek. His skin was cold, yet the gesture warmed her to the core. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked quietly. "You tell me," she said, breathless. "I see abundance. Not just of form but of spirit. The kind that defies centuries of hollow beauty. The kind that wakes what I thought was long dead." His words struck deeper than any compliment. She didn't answer, she couldn't. He bent closer, his voice barely a whisper. "May I?" She nodded. The kiss was soft, uncertain at first, but when his lips brushed hers again, the world tilted. The garden seemed to exhale, the roses swayed though no wind stirred, and the fountain glowed brighter. For a heartbeat, everything around them pulsed with life. When he drew back, Serafina could hardly breathe. "What are you doing to me?" "Nothing you didn't already begin," he said. His voice low, almost reverent. "You've turned the quiet of this place into something alive again." She laughed faintly, shaken. "That sounds terribly poetic for a man who barely eats dinner." "I take my nourishment in other ways," he said with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Before she could ask what he meant, a sudden wind swept through the garden, scattering petals across the path. The air grew colder, sharper. Dorian's expression hardened. "It's late," he said quickly. "We should go inside." "What is it?" "Nothing you need fear. Not tonight." He guided her back toward the manor, his grip firm but gentle. When they reached the door, he looked back once toward the fountain. For an instant, Serafina thought she saw a second shadow beside his, tall, thin, and unmistakably feminine. Then the door shut and it was gone. That night, her dreams were filled with roses that bled silver, and a woman's voice whispering through the leaves. "You wear my face, but he knows it is not me." The next morning dawned gray again. Rain streaked the windows, tracing patterns like veins across the glass. Dorian was gone as always. Martha brought breakfast and avoided eye contact, as if she too felt something heavy in the air. Serafina spent the morning pacing. She couldn't shake the echo of that dream, the voice that sounded almost like her own. Finally she decided she needed answers. The west wing door, the one Martha had warned her about, stood closed as ever. This time when she tried the handle it turned easily. The lock gave way with a soft click, as though the house itself had changed its mind. The air beyond was colder, untouched. Dust floated in pale shafts of light. She walked slowly down the corridor, her footsteps muffled by an old carpet. The walls were lined with portraits, most veiled in dust cloths. At the end of the hall, one stood uncovered. It was the same face she had seen in the gallery, a woman in a crimson gown, eyes green and alive even in oil paint. The resemblance was undeniable. Serafina reached out, fingertips trembling. "Lady Amara," she whispered. The plaque beneath the painting read, "Lady Amara Darden, beloved of Dorian Thorne, 1793. The name sent a jolt through her. Darden, her own family name. She stepped back, heart pounding. The resemblance could not be coincidence. The same name, the same eyes, the same face. "She could be your twin," said a voice behind her. Serafina turned sharply. Dorian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You frightened me," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to know you found what you were looking for," he said. "I wasn't looking." "Yes, you were." He walked toward the portrait, his gaze fixed on it. "You heard the whispers. The house has a way of calling those it remembers." "Calling," she echoed. He turned to her, his voice quieter now. "That woman was your ancestor, Amara Darden. She lived over 2 centuries ago." "And she knew you," Serafina said slowly. "That inscription, beloved of Dorian Thorne. What does it mean?" He hesitated, then said simply, "It means what it says. You loved her." "I did." The honesty in his voice cut deep. Serafina looked back at the portrait. "And she looked like me." "She was you," he said softly. The words made her spine prickle. "What do you mean?" "Perhaps it's madness. Perhaps it's truth. But I believe that souls return when they are unfinished. And when I saw you, I knew her light had found me again." Her pulse raced. "You think I'm her reborn?" "I think you carry what she left behind," he said. "The same fire, the same defiance, the same beauty that terrified the small-minded." Serafina shook her head. "You talk as though I'm not real. As though I'm just a reflection of your past." "No," he said quickly. Not a reflection. A continuation. The room seemed to hum around them, as if the air itself remembered. Dorian moved closer, his voice lowering. You wonder why this house feels alive. Why the mirrors watch you. It's because they remember her. And now they recognize you. She swallowed. That's impossible. Perhaps, he murmured. But what in this place has ever been possible? He reached out and touched the edge of the frame. His hand trembled slightly. She died here, he said quietly. In this room. I buried her beneath the roses you walk among. Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. You're saying you were alive then? 200 years ago. His gaze met hers, steady, sorrowful. Yes. The truth landed between them like thunder. She stepped back, shaking her head. No, that can't be. No man lives that long. I'm not merely a man, he said softly. Silence. The rain outside turned to a steady roar. Serafina's voice broke. Then what are you? Dorian looked at her for a long moment before he answered. What most would call a monster. What others, if they dared, might call immortal. The word felt heavy, unreal. A vampire, she whispered. He didn't deny it. Serafina backed away until her shoulders hit the cold wall. All this time, you married me under false pretenses. No, he said, stepping closer but not reaching for her. I gave you choice. I never lied. I simply waited until you were ready to see. Ready to see what? That my husband drinks blood. Her laugh was bitter, shaky. That my family sold me to something not even human. His expression remained calm, but sorrow touched his eyes. I do not feed as legends say. I do not harm the innocent. I take only what is freely offered, and only enough to survive. And Amara, did she offer? She offered everything, he said. And I refused. I was a coward. I watched her grow old while I remained unchanged. When she died, I vowed never to love again. Serafina's heart pounded. The air in the room felt too thin. And yet you found me. Yes. His voice cracked slightly. And I swore I would protect you, even if it meant lying by silence. She turned toward the portrait again, her mind spinning. You think I'm her, come back to haunt you. I think you're my salvation, he said. Salvation, she repeated softly. From what? Eternal life. From eternal loneliness. The sincerity in his tone stopped her. For a moment she saw not the creature of legend, but the man beneath. The one who had waited centuries for something or someone to make the world feel real again. You should hate me for this truth, he said quietly. I don't know what I feel, she admitted. Fear, wonder, pity, maybe all of them. He took a step closer, slowly, as though approaching a wild creature. Then feel them all. But don't run. Please. She wanted to. Every rational thought screamed at her to flee. And yet, looking into his eyes, she saw no hunger, only grief. Finally she said, If I stay as myself, not as your ghost. A faint smile touched his lips. Then that is how you'll be loved. Lightning flashed through the window, and for an instant, both their faces reflected in the glass, the living and the undying, bound by something neither could explain. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the world clean. Inside, beneath the watchful gaze of the portrait, Serafina realized that whatever she had stepped into was no longer a simple marriage. It was a storm centuries in the making. And she was already standing in its heart. Night pressed close around Ravenhurst Hall, thick as velvet. A fire burned low in the hearth of Dorian's study, throwing thin, restless shadows across shelves of books that looked older than the house itself. Serafina stood by the window, the rain beating against the glass in wild, uneven rhythms. She could still hear his voice from earlier echoing inside her skull. I'm not merely a man. Vampire. The word felt foreign and heavy, like a stone she couldn't yet set down. Every piece of logic insisted she should run, yet here she was, standing in his study while he poured wine he would never drink. You must think me mad, she said finally. He looked up from the decanter, his expression unreadable. Madness and truth often wear the same mask. It only depends who's watching. That's a convenient answer. She folded her arms. So, is that what I am now? The human pet of an immortal creature who thinks in riddles. His mouth twitched, almost smiling. You're not my pet, Serafina. You're my equal. Equal. She laughed bitterly. You've lived hundreds of years. You could crush me with one hand. How could we ever be equals? He set the glass down untouched and walked toward her, slow and deliberate. The faint light from the fire made his eyes seem brighter, silver instead of gray. Because strength isn't only muscle or immortality. You have lived 22 years in a world that never wanted to see you, and you still stand tall. That kind of strength humbles me. Serafina's voice faltered. Don't romanticize my pain, Dorian. I don't. His tone softened. But you must understand, after centuries of empty faces and hollow flattery, you are the first person who has looked at me and truly seen. Not a title, not a myth. A man. She turned away, torn between anger and disbelief. I don't know if I see a man or a monster. He moved closer until his voice was right behind her ear. Perhaps both. The confession lingered in the air like smoke. You said you don't feed as legends tell, she said finally. Then what do you feed on? He hesitated. Willingness. I take only what is offered freely. It's enough to keep me alive, nothing more. And when you can't find anyone willing. His eyes darkened. Then I suffer until I can. The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The image of him weakened in pain, hidden away somewhere in this vast house. It didn't fit the man she had seen standing so calm and powerful. She turned back toward him. Why tell me now? Why not keep pretending? Because you deserve truth, he said. And because the house already whispered it to you. I would rather you hear it from me. The house whispered it, she repeated slowly. You speak as though this place is alive. In its own way it is, he said. Amara's death bound her to it. Her memory lingers in the walls, in the mirrors, in the garden. She has never forgiven me for letting her die. Serafina shivered. And you think she speaks to me? He nodded. She recognizes you. The resemblance confuses her. But it is not hatred she bears you, it's longing. Serafina pressed a hand to her chest. Then all this time the whispers, the reflections, they were her? Partly. The rest is what this house holds of me. She looked into his eyes, trying to find deceit there and finding only exhaustion. You must have seen generations come and go. You must have loved others. He shook his head slowly. No one like you. Her throat tightened. You said that to her too, didn't you? He didn't answer. Silence spoke for him. Finally she whispered. What happens now? That depends on you. She frowned. Me. I've bound myself to this house, to my curse, for longer than I care to count. But your blood carries her lineage. You can break it if you choose. Break it how? By staying, he said simply. By choosing me freely. If you love me not because of Amara, not because of pity, but because of me, the past will lose its hold. And if I can't, then I will let you go. His eyes flicked down, shadowed. Even immortality can't chain what doesn't wish to stay. The storm outside grew louder, wind howling against the glass. Serafina stepped closer before she could think better of it. And if I stayed, what would I become? He studied her, voice low. Mine. But still yourself. Would you turn me? He flinched, barely noticeable. That is not a gift I give lightly. So it's possible. It is, he admitted. But it is forever. Eternity is not romance, Serafina. It's hunger without end. Loneliness that no dawn can cure. Yet you'd endure it again if I asked. He looked at her for a long time. Yes. The honesty in his tone made her heart stumble. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of centuries. Then he said softly, You should rest. The night grows long. But as she turned to leave, he added, almost to himself, and it's about to grow longer. The next day broke sharp and cold. The storm had not ended. It had only changed form. Rain fell in thin, cutting streams, and the air carried a strange electricity that made the skin prickle. Serafina spent the morning walking the upper halls. Every step seemed to echo back at her with a second, ghostly rhythm. The house was louder now. Doors creaking, floors sighing, whispers in corners that stopped when she turned. She could not tell where fear ended and fascination began. At lunch she asked Martha, "How long have you served him?" The maid hesitated. "Since my grandmother's time, milady." Serafina blinked. "Your grandmother's time. That would make you." Martha smiled faintly. "The Thorns care for their own, even their servants. Some of us live longer here. The house keeps us if we keep it." Serafina set down her fork. "So you believe what he is?" "I've seen what he is," Martha said simply. "And I've seen worse things than him." "What could be worse?" "Men who pretend to be human," Martha said softly, then turned away. By evening, thunder rolled again, shaking the glass panes. Dorian hadn't appeared for dinner. The servants moved quickly, nervous. When she asked where he was, none would answer. Finally, unable to stand the waiting, she lit a lamp and went searching. The house seemed different at night. Corridors stretched farther, shadows deeper. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard voices. Low, angry, unfamiliar. She followed the sound down to the great hall. Two figures stood near the entrance. Strangers in dark coats, dripping from rain. One held a silver-tipped cane, the other a bundle of wooden stakes. "Hunters." Serafina froze. The taller man's voice carried. "He's here. I can smell it." The other spat on the floor. "If the rumors are true, he's keeping a wife this time. Poor fool doesn't know she's bedding a corpse." Rage flared through her before fear could. She stepped into the light. "Who are you?" The men turned, startled. "Lady Thorn," one said mockingly, bowing low. "Or should I say Lady of the Dead?" "You will leave this house," she said, gripping the lamp tighter. The taller man smiled coldly. "We've been tracking your husband for years. The Duke of Thornvale has a long history of vanishing towns and bloodless graves. You think he's innocent." "He is not what you believe," she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "No." The man stepped forward. "Then where is he now, while his wife stands guard for him?" Question stung. She didn't know. Then a voice came from behind them. Smooth, low, deadly calm. "I am right here." Dorian stood at the top of the staircase. His coat flowing like shadow. His eyes gleamed silver in the lightning. The hunters turned, weapons rising. Before Serafina could speak, Dorian moved. It was like watching a storm given shape. Swift, silent, unstoppable. He disarmed the first man with a blur of motion, the silver cane clattering away. The second swung the bundle of stakes, but Dorian caught him by the wrist. There was a sharp crack, and the man screamed. "Leave this place," Dorian said, his voice no longer human. "You have no power here." The taller man gasped, blood trickling from his lip. "You can't hide forever, monster." "Forever is precisely what I do," Dorian replied coldly. The men fled, stumbling into the storm. Dorian didn't pursue them. He stood in the entryway, chest rising and falling though he didn't need breath. Rain from the open door caught the light like shards of glass. Serafina lowered the lamp slowly. "They would have killed you. They've tried before." She stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell me they were hunting you?" "Because I wanted you to see what I am without their fear first. And now I have," she said. "You're terrifying." He turned to her. "Yes." She hesitated, then added, "But you didn't hurt them beyond what you had to." He almost smiled. "I've learned restraint." His voice faltered on the last word. She saw it then, the wound on his side, dark and spreading. One of the stakes had grazed him after all. Dorian, she whispered, moving closer. You're bleeding. It will heal. It looks deep. I've survived worse. But his knees wavered. The color drained further from his face, leaving him ghost pale. She caught him before he could fall, guiding him toward the settee near the hearth. You're not healing, she said sharply. What do you need? He met her eyes, anguish flickering there. You already know. The meaning struck her. No. I won't force you, he whispered, voice weakening. I promised never to take without consent. The choice carved through her. Fear and compassion warred inside her chest. He looked so unlike the man who had kissed her in the garden. His strength stripped away, ancient weariness written in every line of his face. She took a deep breath, then offered her wrist. Then take it. He stared at her, eyes wide. Serafina. I said take it. For a heartbeat he didn't move. Then, with trembling control, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her skin. The first touch was light as breath. Then she felt the faintest sting, and warmth spreading as he drank. It didn't hurt. It was dizzying, strange, almost tender. When he pulled away, she swayed. He caught her immediately. His eyes bright again, life restored. I took too much, he murmured. Forgive me. She rested her head against his shoulder, breathing shallowly. You took exactly what was needed. He held her close for a long moment, neither speaking. Outside, the storm finally began to fade, leaving only the sound of rain dripping from the eaves. When he lifted his head, his voice was soft but sure. You asked what happens if you stay. We become each other's salvation, or each other's curse. Serafina closed her eyes. Then I'll take both. He looked down at her, wonder flickering in his eyes, and for the first time in 2 centuries, Dorian Thorne smiled without sorrow. For 3 nights the air around Ravenhurst stayed heavy and uneasy. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed felt wrong. Too still, like the pause between heartbeats. The staff moved quietly, their faces pale, their glances darting toward the windows as if they feared what waited beyond the glass. Even Martha refused to speak above a whisper. Serafina sensed it too. Every evening the sky grew darker a little too soon. The house creaked more. The mirrors seemed to hum faintly when she passed. Dorian had not left his study since the night of the hunters, though she heard him moving long after midnight. On the 4th day she went to him. The door to the study stood open. He sat by the fire, his coat discarded. His shirt unbuttoned just enough for her to see the faint scar where the stake had grazed him. He looked exhausted, his skin almost translucent in the firelight. You're still weak, she said quietly. He shook his head. I've endured worse wounds. That's not an answer. He gave her a tired smile. No, it isn't. Serafina crossed the room and sat opposite him. You're hiding something again. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From the consequences of what you did. Her pulse quickened. I saved your life. You did, he said softly. And by giving your blood freely, you've bound yourself to me more than you realize. The hunters know this. They'll come again, this time for you as well as for me. She felt a chill. How could they know? They always know. Their kind has watched my line for centuries. They've seen when a mortal gives blood willingly. It changes the air, the aura of the one who offers it. To them you're marked. Serafina drew a slow breath, trying to steady herself. Then we fight them together. His head snapped up. You don't understand what you're saying. I do. They came for you because of what you are. They'll come for me because of what I've done. So either we run or we fight. But I will not hide. For a long moment he simply looked at her, something fierce and unspoken rising in his eyes. Then he stood and reached for her hand. Then we prepare. They spent the next 2 nights in uneasy readiness. The staff reinforced doors, shuttered windows, hung garlands of wolfsbane and hawthorn. Dorian sharpened long, thin blades that gleamed blue under candlelight. Serafina learned how to load a small pistol that had belonged to one of his ancestors. On the third night the attack came. It began with a single crash, the sound of glass shattering somewhere below. Then came the unmistakable hiss of fire. Dorian's voice echoed down the halls. "Stay in your room." Serafina ignored him. She grabbed the pistol, pulled on her cloak, and ran toward the main staircase. Smoke curled from the east hall, the air thick with the scent of oil and burning wood. Shadows moved in the haze, men in dark coats, torches in hand. She fired once, the recoil nearly knocking her backward, but the shot struck one of them in the shoulder. He fell with a cry. "Serafina!" Dorian's voice roared from somewhere beyond the smoke. She coughed, eyes watering. "Here!" He appeared through the flames, his face white and furious. "I told you to stay. And let them burn the house down," she shouted back. "No." Another figure lunged from the smoke, stake raised. Dorian moved faster than sight. One moment the man was standing, the next he lay unconscious at Dorian's feet. "There are more," Dorian said grimly. "They've blocked the exits." Serafina grabbed his arm. "Then we use the old servants' passage near the kitchen. It leads to the cliffs." He nodded once. They ran together through the choking corridors, dodging falling embers. Behind them fire crackled louder. The portraits along the walls seemed to twist in the light, eyes flickering as though alive. When they reached the kitchen passage, Serafina stopped short. Two hunters waited at the end, one holding a crossbow, the other a torch. "There!" one shouted. "The beast and his bride." Dorian shoved her behind him, but before the man could fire, Serafina snatched a pot of boiling water from the stove and hurled it. The hunter screamed, dropping his weapon. Dorian struck the other with blinding speed, sending him crashing into the wall. The air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning fabric. Dorian turned back to her, eyes wild with worry. "You shouldn't have followed me. You'd be dead if I hadn't," she gasped. He gave a strangled laugh. "Then we're even." They burst through the hidden door at the end of the passage and stumbled into the night air. The cliff stretched out before them, the sea raging below. Behind them, Ravenhurst burned, the flames devouring its ancient stone heart. Serafina turned, horror flooding her chest. "Your home. It was never mine," he said quietly. "It belonged to ghosts." Figures emerged from the burning doorway, the remaining hunters. Dorian pushed her back. "Run!" "No!" But before she could move, one of the men raised a silver-tipped arrow and fired. The arrow struck Dorian in the chest. He staggered, a low sound tearing from his throat. The light in his eyes dimmed. "Dorian!" He fell to his knees. The hunters advanced. Serafina lifted the pistol again, hands shaking, and fired. The shot went wide. The nearest man swung his blade. She ducked and fired again. This time the bullet found its mark. He collapsed. The others hesitated, seeing their leader fall. Serafina dropped the pistol, ran to Dorian, and pressed her hands over the wound. His blood, dark, strange, almost silver, stained her palms. "It's silver," he whispered. "Poison to my kind." "You'll heal," she said desperately. "You always heal." "Not from this." The remaining hunters turned and fled into the night, leaving the fire to do their work. Dorian's hand trembled as he touched her face. "You have to go. They'll come back with more." "I won't leave you." "You must. If you stay, you'll die." Tears burned her eyes. "Then I'll die with you." He shook his head. "No, not like this. You gave me your blood once. Now I ask for one final gift." "What?" "Let me live through you." His voice was barely a whisper. "Take my blood as I took yours. End this mortal line and be reborn. Only then can we truly be together." She froze, understanding dawning. "You want me to become what you are. It's the only way." Lightning split the sky. The sea roared below them. The burning manor cast its reflection on the water like a second fire. Serafina looked into his fading eyes. If I do this, there's no going back. No, he said softly. But you'll never be alone again. She bent over him, tears falling onto his face. Then show me how. He cupped her cheek, his touch trembling. Bite here. He tilted his head, exposing the side of his neck where the faint pulse still beat. Take only a little, and let the rest follow. Her breath shuddered. I don't know if I can. You can, he said, voice breaking. You always could. With shaking hands, she lowered her lips to his throat. His blood was hot and metallic, flooding her senses. The moment it touched her tongue, the world blurred. Heat surged through her, then cold, then nothing but a single heartbeat shared between them. Enough, he whispered. Now live. Darkness swallowed everything. When light returned, it was red. Not the warm red of sunrise, but the deep crimson of blood seen through water. Serafina lay on cold stone, her body trembling, her mind flickering between waking and dreaming. Dorian knelt beside her, his wound healed, his eyes brighter than she had ever seen them. Breathe, he said softly. Slowly. She tried, and gasped as every sense sharpened at once. The sound of the waves crashed inside her head. She could hear each drop of rain as it hit the stone, each crackle of flame still consuming the manor above. Her heart raced faster than it ever had, then slowed until it matched his. What have you done to me? She whispered. What you asked, he said gently. You chose me. Her vision steadied. The world glowed differently now. Edges sharper, colors deeper, shadows alive with movement. She could smell the salt of the sea, the iron in the air, the faint pulse of life far beyond the cliffs. Her fingers went to her neck. The skin burned faintly under her touch. Am I like you? Yes, he said. And no, you knew. The first in 100 years made of both worlds. She struggled to sit up. I feel hungry, he finished for her. It will pass soon. I don't want to hurt anyone. You won't. You'll learn to choose. The wind rose, carrying sparks from the burning house down toward the cliffs. She watched them float, each ember pulsing like a small dying star. Ravenhurst is gone. Then it's time for something new, Dorian said quietly. He helped her to her feet. She was unsteady, her body feeling both weightless and impossibly strong. The rain didn't chill her. The air no longer bit at her skin. Every part of her felt too alive. Dorian reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. You are even more beautiful now. Beautiful, she said, half laughing, half weeping. I'm a monster. His gaze softened. So am I. Yet here we stand, breathing in a world that tried to bury us. If that is monstrosity, then let the world tremble. She looked out at the dark horizon. What happens now? He smiled faintly. Now we make the night our own. They left the cliffs before dawn. Behind them, the fire at Ravenhurst dimmed into smoke. Before them stretched the wild moorland, endless and silver under the dying moon. Serafina felt each step as a new heartbeat. Every movement sang in her blood. Dorian walked beside her in silence until she finally spoke. You said the bond between us could break your curse. Has it? He paused. Not yet. But it's changing. I can feel it. How will you know when it's gone? When I can stand beneath the sun without burning. She thought about that for a while. Then we'll find a way to make it happen. He looked at her with quiet wonder. You would face the sun for me? She smiled faintly. You faced death for me. Seems fair. They reached the edge of the woods. Dorian stopped, turning to her. The hunger will come again. You'll hear every heartbeat, smell every vein. When it happens, you must remember who you were before this. Hold on to it. It's what keeps us from becoming beasts. I'll remember, she said. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Then the night will remember us. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of dawn far off beyond the horizon. Serafina closed her eyes and felt it, a warmth that no longer burned her, only reminded her of what she had once been. When she opened them, the world seemed new. The storm had passed, and somewhere deep inside her chest, a steady calm replaced fear. She had crossed the line between life and legend, between prey and power. She glanced at Dorian. So this is eternity. He smiled, the first real smile she'd ever seen from him. Not eternity, he said. Just the beginning. They walked together into the deep forest, hand in hand, as the first thin rays of dawn touched the ashes of Ravenhurst behind them. And though the sun could not yet claim them, the light seemed to follow anyway, spilling through the trees like a promise. The first night after the fire was unlike any Seraphina had ever known. The forest around her pulsed with life. Every rustle of leaf, every heartbeat of a creature far away, she could feel as clearly as her own breath. The moonlight no longer chilled her. It caressed her skin like a lover's touch. The world had sharpened into something vast and wild, and she was part of it. She awoke beneath an ancient oak, the damp earth cool beneath her fingers. Dorian sat beside her, his dark coat wrapped around her shoulders, watching the horizon with that unreadable stillness she now recognized as centuries of practiced control. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice softer, yet stronger somehow. 3 hours, he said. "You won't need much more than that again." She sat up slowly. "I thought I was dead." "In a way," he murmured. "But death is only the door. You've stepped through it." She studied him, noting the faint glow that lingered around his eyes. "And what am I now?" He turned toward her, his expression reverent. "You are reborn. You are mine, but more than that, Seraphina. You are yourself, multiplied by eternity." She laughed faintly, touching her chest. "It feels different. My heart, it beats but slower. My thoughts." She paused, trying to find words for the rush of sensations. "Everything is louder." "You're hearing the world," Dorian said. "It will take time to control. Until then, listen to it. The night will teach you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver pendant, an old crest engraved with a raven surrounded by thorns. "This was Amara's," he said. "I've kept it through every century. I want you to have it now." She hesitated. "Won't it remind you of her?" "It already does," he said softly. "But when I look at you wearing it, I'll see that grief turned into something alive again." She accepted the pendant and fastened it around her neck. It was cold at first, then it warmed against her skin as though recognizing her. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, standing, "we build something new." He offered her his hand, and she took it. Together they left the forest and traveled until the land gave way to rolling moors and distant ruins. The wind sang through the grass like a hymn. There, in the hollow of a crumbling abbey, they found shelter. "This place is forgotten," Dorian said. "No one will come here." She looked around. "It's beautiful in a lonely way. Like you once were," he said. She smiled faintly. "And now you are not lonely." That night, Seraphina walked alone through the ruins, her senses alive with the pull of every heartbeat beyond the walls. She could hear deer grazing in the woods, foxes whispering through the underbrush, even the soft flutter of bats high above. The hunger was there too, low, steady like a second pulse beneath her own. She found Dorian near the abbey altar, standing among broken stones lit by moonlight. He turned as she approached. "It's calling, isn't it?" "The hunger?" she asked. He nodded. "I can feel it, but it doesn't frighten me." He smiled faintly. "Then you're stronger than I was. How did you endure it?" "With guilt," he said simply. "It kept me careful." Seraphina stepped closer. "And I have you." "You have yourself," he corrected gently. "I am only the shadow beside your fire." She reached for his hand. "Then stay close. Shadows make the fire brighter." He looked at her with something between awe and fear. "You were never meant to belong to anyone, Seraphina. And yet, I belong to you." When their lips met this time, it was not fragile or uncertain. It was the binding of two creatures who had crossed death and chosen each other in the aftermath. The night around them seemed to breathe, the ruined abbey whispering with old voices. Somewhere far off, the first cry of dawn sounded across the moors, but the light could not yet touch them. When they broke apart, she whispered, "You said I was your equal. Then treat me like one." He bowed his head. "Then rule beside me." She smiled. "I intend to." Days or perhaps weeks passed. Time lost its meaning in the eternal rhythm of moonrise and starlight. Together, they began rebuilding what the fire had taken. Villagers from miles away spoke in whispers of strange figures wandering the moors at night, of shadows moving where no human could survive. Rumors turned to legends, of the Lady of Ravenhurst returned from the ashes, her eyes brighter than the moon. One evening, Dorian brought her to a nearby village, cloaked in shadow. "Watch," he murmured. "See how they look at you." She watched from afar as townsfolk gathered near the tavern fire. One man spoke of the fire that had devoured Ravenhurst, another of two silhouettes seen walking through the flames, unharmed. "They call you the Queen of Night," Dorian said with a hint of amusement. She turned to him. "Then I suppose it's only fair they call you the King." He shook his head. "I have ruled long enough. This is your reign." Serafina smiled, and the night itself seemed to bend around her. Word of Serafina's disappearance spread quickly. Within a month, the Darden family announced her death, tragically lost in the fire that consumed Ravenhurst Hall. Society mourned in polite tones, relieved to have such scandal conveniently erased. Black ribbons hung on the estate gates for a week before being replaced by invitations to another daughter's wedding. But Serafina was far from gone. From the shadowed hills, she watched as carriages came and went from her family's crumbling mansion. Dorian stood beside her, silent. "They've forgotten me already," she said bitterly. "They never knew you," Dorian replied. "They knew a mirror of what they wanted you to be." She said nothing, only stared at the lights flickering in the house below. For years she had tried to earn their love, to fit inside the narrow shape they allowed her. Now she saw how small it had been. "They think they buried their shame," she said. "But shame doesn't die so easily." "No," Dorian said softly. "It waits." She turned to him, eyes gleaming faintly red in the dark. "Then let it wait for me." That night, Serafina returned to her old home, not as the obedient daughter they had scorned, but as something reborn. The doors opened easily beneath her hand, the wood groaning as if recognizing its maker. The halls smelled of dust and candle smoke. She walked silently, her steps soundless on the marble. In the grand parlor, her parents sat near the fire. Lord Darden looked older, his hair streaked with grey. Her mother, elegant as ever, sipped wine and sighed. "I only wish she had been more presentable," Lady Darden murmured. "It would have spared us all this trouble." "She was always difficult," her father replied. "Unruly, stubborn. But Dorian Thorne's money has saved us from ruin at least. Let her rest in peace." Serafina's lips curved into a small, cold smile. "I intend to." They froze. The voice came from behind them, familiar and impossible. Slowly they turned. Their daughter stood in the doorway, her gown black as ink, her skin pale as marble. The firelight caught the silver pendant at her throat. "Serafina," her mother whispered. How is this possible?" "You wanted me gone," she said calmly. "You sold me to save your debts. Consider your wish fulfilled." Her father rose, trembling. "What are you?" "The result of your bargain," she said. "And his." She nodded toward the shadow that slid into the room behind her. Dorian, silent, watchful. Her mother backed away, clutching her pearls. "You're dead. Once," Serafina said. "Now I'm something better." "Stay away from us," Lord Darden stammered. "You're an abomination." She tilted her head. "You call me that now, but you didn't seem to mind when my husband's fortune fed your estate." Her mother's voice trembled. "Please, Serafina, whatever you've become, don't harm us." "I won't," she said. I've learned mercy from the man you feared most. Dorian stepped forward. We came not for vengeance, but for closure. Serafina looked between them one last time. You have your lives. Keep them. But you'll never speak my name again. Let the world remember me as legend, not disgrace. They said nothing. Fear had frozen their tongues. She turned away, her cloak swirling behind her. Dorian followed her to the door. When they stepped back into the night, she breathed deeply of the cold air. It's over. For them, Dorian said. But not for you. You're free now. She looked up at the stars. I never knew freedom could feel so heavy. It always does at first, he said. You've carried chains so long that the absence of them feels like weight. She smiled faintly. Then let me grow strong enough to bear it. He touched her cheek gently. You already are. They left the Darden estate behind them, its lights dwindling into the distance. As they walked through the mist, Serafina felt no hatred, only a strange calm. The pain that had once defined her had burned away with Ravenhurst. What remained was sharper, purer, a quiet resolve. They'll never know what became of me, she said softly. They will, Dorian replied. They'll tell stories. About the daughter who defied death, about the queen who walks under the moon. They'll whisper your name for centuries. She glanced at him. And you'll tell them the truth. He smiled faintly. The truth is overrated. Legends live longer. They reached the edge of the woods again. The moon rose high, casting silver light across the grass. Dorian took her hand and pressed it to his chest, where his heart would have been. Feel that? He asked. There's nothing, she said. Exactly, he whispered. And yet, because of you, it feels full again. She looked up at him, and for the first time since her rebirth, she laughed, a low, genuine sound that startled even her. It echoed through the trees, bright and haunting. Then let them think me a ghost, she said. Because I am. A ghost that learned how to live. Dorian's smile deepened. Then long live the Ghost Queen. And as the wind carried her laughter through the forest, the stars seemed to flare brighter, as if the heavens themselves acknowledged the birth of something both monstrous and divine. Weeks turned into months, though neither of them felt time in the same way anymore. For Serafina, the night stretched endlessly, an ocean of stars and silence, each wave a new secret. She learned what it meant to live without breath, to hunger without pain, to walk unseen through a world that had once mocked her. Dorian watched her with quiet pride. She moved differently now, graceful, deliberate, like a queen accustomed to command. The fear that once shadowed her eyes had vanished, replaced by something fierce and untamed. Word of their survival had already begun to spread among the hidden kind, the ones who thrived in the dark corners of human cities, unseen but powerful. Whispers carried on the wind. The Lady of the Fire has risen. The Queen of the Eternal Dark walks beside the Duke of Shadows. It was only a matter of time before the invitation arrived. A letter sealed in black wax, delivered by a raven at dusk. Dorian broke it open without surprise. The message was written in silver ink on parchment as dark as midnight. To Lord Dorian Thorne, Keeper of the North Moors, and his newly risen consort. The Council of the Night requests your presence at the Grand Masquerade of Shadows, held under the blood moon at the House of Veils. Attendance is compulsory. Serafina looked up from the letter. A council. The oldest of our kind, Dorian said. They rule from secrecy, each one older than empires. They will want to see you. See me. Why? Because you broke a rule, he said. You were turned out of love, not survival. To them that is dangerous. Love is dangerous. He smiled faintly. To immortals it always is. The House of Veils lay hidden beneath the earth, accessible only through a cavern entrance behind a waterfall. When they arrived, hundreds had gathered, vampires of every age and origin, clothed in finery that shimmered like shadow and silk. Masks gleamed with jewels, feathers, and metal, each face a mystery. Serafina wore a gown of deep crimson, its fabric whispering with every step. A mask of silver leaves framed her eyes. Dorian's attire matched hers, black and silver, regal but understated. Together they entered the ballroom, and silence followed. Every gaze turned toward them. Conversations halted. The music softened to a low, steady pulse. "They're staring," she murmured. "They're deciding," he said quietly, "whether to fear you or to worship you." At the far end of the room, upon a dais carved from obsidian, sat the council. 5 figures motionless as statues. In the center, an elder woman in a gown of white lace raised a jeweled hand. "Lord Thorn," she said, her voice like ice on glass. "You bring us a miracle, or a mistake." Dorian bowed slightly. "Your Grace, I bring you what your kind forgot, hope." Her eyes flicked to Seraphina. "And she is this hope." Seraphina stepped forward before Dorian could answer. "I am what you fear," she said. "Something you thought impossible. Love reborn where death reigns." Murmurs rippled through the room. The elder's lips curved faintly. Bold words for one so newly made. "Truth doesn't need age to have power," Seraphina said. The elder leaned forward, intrigued. "And what would you do with such power, child?" Seraphina met her gaze, unflinching. "I would use it to remind you that eternity without purpose is still a cage. Broke mine. You can break yours." A hush fell over the hall. The other council members whispered among themselves. Finally the elder spoke again. "You speak as though we should bow to you." Seraphina tilted her head slightly, her voice calm. "Not bow. Rise." The words struck like a bell. The music stopped entirely now. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Dorian watched, proud but wary. He knew the power in her voice. Newborn yet ancient, commanding without cruelty. It was the same tone Amara had once possessed, but tempered by wisdom born of pain. The elder smiled, though her eyes were sharp. "You are dangerous indeed. Perhaps too much so." Seraphina stepped closer to the dais. "Only to those who mistake control for strength." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Even the younger vampires, rebels who had long chafed under the council's rule, nodded subtly. The elder's gaze moved between Seraphina and Dorian. "Love has blinded you both before. Will it destroy you again?" Dorian took Seraphina's hand. "No. It will crown us." The elder regarded them for a long moment, then finally inclined her head. "Then be crowned, Lady of Fire. But remember, every queen is watched." She rose, her movements slow and deliberate. The rest of the council followed. Together they bowed, slightly but unmistakably. The music began again, louder now, triumphant. The crowd surged into motion, masks glinting, laughter echoing through the grand hall. Dorian leaned close to Seraphina's ear. "You just changed everything." She smiled faintly. "Then let them adapt." They danced beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by immortal eyes. Every movement drew attention. The reborn queen and her ancient duke, the living embodiment of everything forbidden and beautiful. When the dance ended, even the most jaded faces could not hide their awe. Whispers followed them as they left the hall. "The queen has risen. The balance has shifted." Outside, under the blood moon, Dorian stopped her. "Do you realize what you've done?" "Yes," she said, turning toward him. "I've shown them that love is not weakness." He smiled. "You've reminded them to fear it again." And for the first time in centuries, the immortal world trembled, not from war or hunger, but from the power of 2 hearts that refused to die. They returned to the ruins of Ravenhurst as dawn threatened the horizon. The fire had long been extinguished, leaving only blackened stone and charred roses. Yet the earth was fertile again. New buds had begun to bloom among the ashes, roses so dark they seemed made of shadow. Seraphina knelt, touching one gently. "Even fire couldn't kill them." "They were fed by our blood," Dorian said quietly. "They'll never die now." She rose and turned to him. "Neither will we." He nodded. "If that is what you wish." "What else could I wish for?" she asked. This life, this eternity, it's everything they told me I couldn't have. Power, freedom, love. I want to live it fully." He smiled, brushing her hair back from her face. "Then let us live it loudly." They spent days rebuilding. Together, they raised new walls from the ruins, stronger and more magnificent than before. The manor that rose was no longer Ravenhurst Hall. It was Ebonspire, a fortress of glass and obsidian that reflected moonlight like a living thing. Vampires came from across continents to see it. Some came to pledge loyalty, others to challenge her claim. None succeeded. The stories spread, of the queen who could command flame without burning, whose laughter turned fear into fascination, whose love could silence centuries of hatred. At dusk, she stood on the highest balcony, watching the endless horizon. The world belonged to her now, not as a ruler of men, but as the mistress of everything between dusk and dawn. Dorian joined her, his arm slipping around her waist. "You've given them hope," he said. "And what have I given you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A reason to exist beyond survival." She leaned against him. "Do you regret turning me?" "Only that I didn't do it sooner." For a long while, they stood in silence, the wind weaving through their hair, the night whispering like an old friend. Then Seraphina said softly, "When you first saw me, you said I reminded you of someone you lost." "I did," he admitted. "But I was wrong. You weren't her return. You were her redemption. Everything she couldn't be, you are." She looked up at him, her eyes glimmering like starlight reflected on wine. "Then tell me something, Dorian. What will we do now?" He smiled, his fangs catching the moonlight. "Now we reign." And they did. Under their rule, the hidden world began to change. Vampires who had lived like ghosts learned to walk among men again, not as predators but as whispers of myth. The council's power waned. Songs were sung in the dark about the Queen of the Eternal Dark and her shadowed consort. But despite the glory, Seraphina never forgot the woman she once was, the scorned daughter who had been sold like a burden. Sometimes, she would wander the moonlit gardens alone and see her reflection faintly in the glass windows. "You're still here," she would whisper to her old self. "But you're free now." One night, as she stood by the black roses, she caught her reflection again. For a heartbeat, it wasn't her. It was Amara, smiling softly from the other side of the glass. "Thank you," the reflection mouthed. Seraphina reached out, her fingers brushing the cold surface. "Rest now," she whispered. "We're both home." Behind her, Dorian's voice carried through the quiet. "Talking to ghosts again. Just saying goodbye." He stepped beside her, his hand finding hers. "Then let them sleep. We have eternity to live." They turned toward the horizon together. The moon hung low, massive and red against the sky. Its light touched their faces like a benediction. Dorian looked at her, awe still in his eyes even after all they had endured. "You were never meant to be caged, Seraphina. You were meant to rule the night." She smiled, her voice soft but certain. "And now I do." As they stood among the blooming roses, the first faint shimmer of dawn touched the edges of the world. The light reached for them, but instead of retreating, Seraphina lifted her hand toward it. The sun's warmth brushed her skin. It did not burn. Dorian's eyes widened. "Seraphina." She smiled through the rising light. "Maybe your curse has broken after all." He stared at her, wonder overtaking fear. The sunlight touched his face next, warm and golden, and for the first time in 200 years, he felt no pain. The wind rose around them, scattering petals of black and crimson into the sky. Seraphina turned to him, her voice like music. "The world will remember us." He smiled. "Forever." And as the dawn broke fully over Ebonspire, the queen and her immortal consort stood hand in hand beneath the newborn sun. No longer creatures of the dark, but rulers of it, bound not by blood or death, but by the love that conquered them both. And that is how the Queen of the Eternal Dark claimed her throne beneath the rising sun. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt her fire, her power, her rise from ruin, Then don't let the night end here. Hit that subscribe button, join the realm, and ring the bell so you never miss the next chapter of passion, power, and immortal love. Because here, every story bleeds and every queen burns brighter.